5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay.
Today is February 28th, 1995. This is an interview with Mr. Tibor Schwartz. The interviewer is Roseanne Krusner. We're in Toronto, Canada, and the language is in English. Please introduce yourself.
My name is Tibor Schwartz, known in Canada as Ted Schwartz.
When were you born?
March 11, 1928.
So at the time of this interview, you are how old?
Today, 67 years old.
And where were you born?
I was born in Valea lui Mihai, Romania.
What part of Romania is that?
That is the western part of Romania, almost at the border with Hungary.
Would that be considered Transylvania?
Transylvania.
And how long did you stay in Valea lui Mihai?
I stayed there the first 16 years of my life.
Now, I understand that Hungary acquired the city.
Hungary acquired one half of Transylvania in 1940.
And did the name of the city change?
Yes, it changed to Érmihelyfalva.
Tell me a bit about what life was like growing up in your hometown.
Well, I can remember back as far as 1934-35.
So you were about 6 or 7 years old?
I was 6, I can remember back to age 6. And life was plain, uneventful. In the town where I lived, there were mixed Jewish and non-Jewish population. And we went to public school, and the schools were mixed. There was no difference between races. And we went to public school in the morning and into the afternoon. Then in the late afternoon we went to the Jewish school from 4 o'clock until 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock.
What sort of things did you learn in the Jewish school?
We learned to read and write in Hebrew. Although I can say I wasn't the best student.
Was it a mixed school? Was it boys and girls together? The Jewish school?
Boys and girls together, yes.
Did you have a religious upbringing?
I had a religious upbringing. My parents were religious. My grandparents were ultra-religious. And with the generations, the religion became less and less.
So your personal religion, the one that you subscribed to, how would you describe it, even though you were a young child?
Well, at the time, I followed my parents' teaching. And but once I was away from them, then things started to be different.
So your mother kept a kosher home?
Yes.
And did you go to synagogue daily?
No, my father went to synagogue daily. I didn't.
In school, in public school, you said that the religions weren't divided, it wasn't specified, but did everybody know who the Jews were and who the Jews weren't?
In a small town, you usually know who is Jewish and who is not. In my early part of my life, I don't think it made any difference.
You didn't find that you were singled out in any sort of way?
No, not in my early part of my life.
Were you into sports when you were in school?
No.
What was your favorite subject?
Well, actually, sports in those days, sports wasn't within the school's curriculum. And we went to watch a soccer game, and but I really didn't play any sport.
Was there a particular subject you excelled at in school?
Yes. I was good in numbers. And that takes me back to when I was about 6 years old. I handled numbers very easily, such as adding, multiplying, subtracting, and so on. And people stopped me on the street they asked me number questions.
As a child?
As a child, 6 years old. And I gave them quick answers. And they were amazed how well I knew my numbers. And as I grew up, and my father always used to tell me that, well, I have a lot of confidence in my son, the youngest. And later on, he used to manufacture broomsticks. He had machinery. And he sent me out to sell broomsticks to the shops in town. And I used to come back with orders. So and so wants 10 pieces, somebody else wants 12 pieces, and so I was his salesman at age 10.
Now, were you writing these down, or did you just remember the numbers?
I
in your
just
head?
remembered it.
Now, you said that your father manufactured broomsticks. What was his trade by profession?
Well, he was a cabinet maker, and he manufactured furniture, windows and doors, sometimes broomsticks, and he made beehives, the boxes for the bees, and whatever can be made from wood, he would make it. And in those days, very few people were equipped with modern machinery, like electrically run machinery, and he was one of them who had the machinery.
What was his name?
His name was Solomon.
And tell me about your mother.
My mother was a housewife, and she looked after the children. It was a primitive type living in comparison to today. And she did whatever one would do as a housewife. In the morning, it was my job to bring the geese, bring them in, and she would force feed the geese. In the evening, we would do the same thing again, bring the geese in. She used to feed about 6 or 8, sometimes 10. And the geese would fatten up in about 4 or 5 weeks, ready for killing. It was my job to take the geese to the showhead, the ritual slaughter, and bring it back.
So it was for personal consumption?
For personal consumption.
And what was her name?
Malvina.
And her maiden name?
Well, her maiden name was Weiss.
You also had brothers and sisters?
Yes.
Tell me about them.
We were 4 children. The oldest, Anna, she's 7 years older than I am. Then Erno, he was 4 years older than I am. And Mike, or Miklos, he is 2 years older than I am.
And what was it like growing up in a house with 2 brothers and a sister?
Well,
And you're the youngest.
we had a house where there were 2 bedrooms, but of course in those days, in those places, you could make a bed in the kitchen for sleeping, and we had in our bedroom there was no heating in the house, no central heating. So we would go to sleep at night. In the winter time, we would put a hot brick into the bed to warm up the bed. and my brother Mickey and I slept in the same bed. My sister slept in a different part of the house. Like we had a living room, we can call it a living room, and my older brother Ernie would sleep in the kitchen. A bed would be made, opened up in the kitchen, and he would sleep there. We had a wood stove for cooking, and we had a wood stove in the living room which was heated with sawdust. My father had a carpenter shop, and he would accumulate all the sawdust and shavings from wood, and all this would be good for fuel.
Do you remember what it was like in the house during the holidays or on Shabbat?
Well, during the holidays, my mother would prepare everything in advance, and she did not cook on the Shabbat. And they would not touch a candlestick, for example, from the table. We would call in a neighbor who was a Gentile to make the fire on a cold day, or put wood on the fire, or take the candlestick off the table, because they wouldn't do it.
Do you recall any weddings or bar mitzvahs? And if so, how would they differ from those that you would go to Toronto today?
Well, I remember one of my uncles got married, and in fact this uncle is living today in New York City, and the weddings were made in a home. The whole family would get together, start cooking, and everybody in town was invited. And it was a plain wedding. People ate, people drank, and very often in the town they were beggars who would come from other cities, and they would inquire who had a wedding or a bar mitzvah. So they would go and take advantage of it.
So when you say everyone in town was invited,
Everybody,
how many people are we talking about?
we are talking about the Jewish people. They don't,
So how many people?
I would say 200 people would turn out. Not everybody would come, but about 200 people would turn up.
And the family would do all the cooking for?
The family would do.
Now, you would have had your bar mitzvah just after your hometown went into Hungarian hands.
Yes.
What was that like?
Well, my whole bar mitzvah I was called in the synagogue, called to the Torah, and it was no more than 10-15 minutes of prayers, and my father would invite people from the synagogue to have a drink or a piece of cake, and that was it.
Do you remember what it was like preparing for that, and how long would you prepare it for?
Well, not very long, because we were already in a. Once the Hungarians came in, the town wasn't the same anymore. We didn't have the same feelings for doing things as it used to be done before.
Can you elaborate on that?
Well, to the best of my recollection is we just didn't we didn't have the feeling to make a big affair, and also in those days we were not rich. We made a living, but we didn't have a lot of money to make parties like we would do it in Canada.
Let's talk a bit more about Hungary acquiring your region and how that changed or didn't change life for you.
Well, I remember when it was announced that the Hungarians will come 10 o'clock tomorrow, next day. And everybody from the town went out to the main street to wait for the soldiers to march in. And well, soldiers came on foot, and soldiers came with horse-drawn carriages. And people were happy, and they were yelling greetings. And it was otherwise it was a normal day. The following day, everything was taken. All the officers or city officials became Hungarian, and life went on as it did before. And this, I believe, this was in the summer of 1940, or early summer.
Can you recall any conversations that took place in your household about what your families?
Well, some people were pessimistic about having the Hungarians coming in, and some people were optimistic. So it was a mixed opinion.
What about your particular family?
My family was, the best I can remember, they were in between, being optimistic and pessimistic.
What was life before that for Romanian Jews? How were they treated as a whole?
Well, at that time I was age 13 and younger, and I don't remember anything out of the ordinary. That there were, in Romania, there were anti-Semitic organizations, and they, in Hungarian, we used to call Varsgardista, an iron bunch, or something of that nature. And they had a bad reputation of being anti-Semitic, but it really didn't hit us. We heard it was happening mainly in Bucharest, in the main cities.
So when the hands when the Hungarian hands settled onto your region, were you cautious about how it might change the level of anti-Semitism?
Well, again, we were hoping that things will be good, and it was a sort of cautious optimism.
Did it change?
Well, gradually it started to change.
For the better or the worse?
See, the Hungarians were a lot influenced by the Germans. By this time, the Germans were they were sending in anti-Semitic films, and in the newspaper things started to show up more and more, and eventually it came to a point where 2-year-old children, Gentile children, would yell at us on the street, "Dirty Jew." They started at age 2. As soon as they could speak, they learned the word. They learned the word "dirty Jew."
So you would have been about 16, no, not 16, 17.
Well, I was between 13 and 16.
Was this the first time you had been singled out? And
Not necessarily the first time, but it would be more obvious between the age that I became 13 up to 16. And there was one incident that I often reflect of. In grade 5, I started to go in a Hungarian school. And the teacher was Hungarian. So he asked questions first day in school. He asked, one of the first questions was, why do we use paper money instead of gold money? So I put up my hand and I said, well, we don't use gold money because gold can get lost. Gold wears away if you handle it all the time, and paper can be replaced. Oh, very good answer. Then he asked another question, and again I put up my hand first. And happened 4 or 5 times. So he says, oh, very, very good answer. What is your name? I said, my name is Tibor Schwartz. Are you Jewish? I said, yes. But he asked the question. he, he asked the question in a manner like it was like anti-Semitic way.
How did the rest of the class react when he did that?
Well, I don't remember how they reacted.
And how did you react?
Well, I told my parents the incident, but of course they didn't make much of it.
Do you remember anything in particular your father or your mother said to you?
No. No, they didn't make a big deal of it.
Did they have any advice of how to deal with situations like that?
No.
Did your father belong to any particular Jewish organizations in your city?
No, he belonged to the synagogue.
Were there any Jewish organizations in your city?
They were some Jewish organization which was the what is present in present day. It would be an Israeli movement, the Beitar. But I didn't know much about it.
And your brothers?
My brothers would be about the same as I was. They were not part of any organization.
Do you remember any newspapers being in the house? Were they Hungarian? Were they Jewish newspapers?
They were. We had Hungarian newspapers, which my mother used to read daily, and from 1940 on, there used to be a lot of times anti-Semitic articles that we took note of.
Do you remember reading any incidents of what was going on in Poland or other countries?
No, we never heard of. Well, we did hear that Jewish people are mistreated, but we didn't know to the extent.
When was the first time you heard or understood the word Nazi?
Well, that I would understand from 1939 on, because we read in a paper about the Nazis invading Czechoslovakia and Poland and Russia and France and so on. Well, we were up to date with the news.
Did you have any personal fears?
Well, we were afraid of the Germans, because the news that we did get was not good.
When you say the news that you did get, that was not
well,
good.
about the Nazis, we knew that the Nazis are anti-Jewish and anti-Semitic.
Now, at this time, did your family discuss, or members of your extended family discuss, leaving Hungary?
Never.
Did you know of other families or relatives that did?
None. Nobody left. After France was occupied by the Nazis, my mother's brother lived in Paris, and he escaped from Paris, and he came back to Ermihajfalva, and then he lived there till they rounded us up for the Holocaust, and he met his death in the concentration camp.
Now, when did things really begin to change for the worse, and when were you aware of it?
Well, it became the very worst when the Germans actually came into to Ermihajfalva, and well, the Germans came in as friendly authority to the Hungarians, and I would see. I remember one particular instance where an elderly Jewish man with a long beard was walking on the street, and the young German soldiers would get a hold of him, and they were pulling his beard, and they would make fun with him, laugh at him, and well, they didn't harm him on that occasion, but they just pulled his beard to have fun.
When would that have been? What year?
That was in March 1944.
Now you watched this.
Yes.
Were there many people watching?
Well, whoever walked by would be watching, but the Hungarians would laugh about it together with the Germans.
At what point did you start wearing a yellow star?
That was around March 1944.
Do you remember being told you had to wear one?
Yes. My mother sewed it on my coat, and I was told that I have to wear it when I go out into the town.
And were you self-conscious? Did you not approve of it? Did you not mind?
Well, we knew that we are persecuted at this time, but there is nothing that we can do about it, or nothing that we tried to do about it. And I was 16 years old. I followed my parents' guidance.
Did you have a circle of friends that were just Jewish, or did you have non-Jews too?
We had non-Jewish friends.
How were they reacting to your Jewish star and your persecution?
Practically nobody stood up for us. And some people would privately make a statement that they didn't approve of it, but to go out and stand up for us, nobody did. But really speaking, we Jewish people didn't stand up for ourselves.
Now, at this time, were you still in school?
No. I left school in 1941. And my mother found a apprentice job for me by one of her cousins as a dental technician apprentice.
So was the firm that you were apprenticed to, was it mostly Jewish?
Well, it was my mother's cousin was a dentist, and he had a dental office and a dental laboratory where they were teaching me the trade.
So did you come into contact with clients who were Jewish or non-Jewish?
Well, we knew everyone in town, so we would know who is Jewish, who is not.
Now, at the time when you were wearing a yellow star, were you still an apprentice?
Well, I was, yes, but that was already close to the time of we were taken away to the camps.
Did you, when you were still an apprentice and in your hometown, what was your view of, were you going to have a future as a dental technician? Did it come into your mind at all?
Not really, no. You always hope that things will turn out better, the war will be over. And in 1942-43, we heard news from the war, and in the newspaper almost daily there were news items that the German army has successfully retreated from one part of Russia or another, so my father could interpret the news his way, that when they say successfully retreated, that means they are beaten. And we were hoping that the war will be over and the Germans will be beaten. But of course, the Germans got to us before they were beaten.
Your hometown to the first ghetto that you went to?
One day we had there was an announcement that the entire Jewish population would have to go to the railway station, and they can take with them as much as they can carry.
When you say an announcement, what do you mean?
Well, the authorities, they went around to the homes, and also they used to read out the news on the street, and that we were given that we have to leave by a certain time next day. So my parents started to prepare things, what to take with us, and we didn't know where we are going to go. My father took certain valuables, and he built a cabinet inside a wall. The wall must have been about maybe 18-inch thick. So he would take the core out from the wall and build a cabinet. And of course, it didn't take too much brains for somebody to find whatever there was and take it out. Next day, on the specified time, we would be marching to the railway station, and we boarded trains which would carry us to Nagyvárad.
Do you remember walking through the town towards the train station?
Yes, we were walking in a long line, and I would say that it was nothing different than having a bunch of sheep or cattle marched, and nobody protested.
Were there guards?
There were Hungarian guards with a feather on their hats, and this was they were called the Hungarian mountain police. And we really marched like sheep, like cattle. No protest. Nobody would run or fight or anything. And of course, I followed my parents' instruction. They go, everybody goes.
So from the whole Jewish community in your city, did anyone try and hide or escape?
Well, some people did escape, and I don't know where they went to. There was one Jewish family who, well, we are going back now several years. One Jewish family, there were 3 children, 2 sons and 1 daughter. The children were young, and the family decided to go to Romania, not to stay around till the Hungarians come in. And they settled in Romania, and it so happened that those children certainly would have died if they didn't run away. And as it is today in 1995, all 3 of them are living, and 1 is living in Toronto and 2 in Israel. And the parents lived, so the whole family survived the war.
But at the time when you were herded towards the railway station, of the 2,000 or so Jews, would you say most of them complied?
I would say 99.9% has complied.
When you got to the railway station, were there civilians, or even on the way to there, were there Hungarian civilians?
There were Hungarians on the street. They were watching us going, and there was no protest or anything. But as I said before, that if we ourselves didn't protest, why should they?
So tell me about when you got to the railway station.
Well, we were boarded trains, and I don't remember what kind of trains they were. We went to Oradea, which is 65 kilometers to the south.
Were you allowed to keep your belongings with you?
We kept all that we can carry. We kept it. When we got to Oradea, we went from the railway station to a lumber yard. it was a large lumber yard, and different levels, and each family would stake out for themselves an area where they would sit down or better themselves down. We had some blankets, and we had our clothing, and we ate the food that we carried with us.
Were you escorted from the railway station to this lumberyard?
Yes, by the same type of Hungarian police.
Is this the gendarme?
Yes.
So the area in the lumberyard that you were in was uncovered? It was exposed to the
It was
air?
exposed to the wind or rain, and there was a roof over our head. And we were at this lumberyard for 2 weeks.
Tell me about that time.
Well, there were the entire lumberyard was filled with people, and some people would make a fire to warm up something. We would find some wood and things, but mainly we ate the cold things, cookies or bread or cake or whatever we had. We had enough food that we carried with us.
Was there ever a time when the gendarme or the people who were guarding you came looking for valuables?
They were looking for valuables, but I don't remember to what extent. I don't remember that part. It so happened that my family didn't have any valuables such as gold or diamonds.
Now, was the place guarded?
It was guarded, yes.
Was it closed off at all?
Yes.
Who guarded it?
The Hungarian gendarmes.
What was the conversations like in this ghetto?
Well, everyone was concerned that where are we going from here? What is going to happen to us? And there were some rumors which was brought in by Hungarians, say that, well, they're going to ship the Jews to Germany. And again, we didn't know for what purpose. Then it became official at a later date that they're going to take us to Germany for resettlement, and they're going to give us work. They need workers. And so we were at this ghetto in Oradea for 2 weeks. Then the announcement was made that everybody has to get ready, and we're going to move on.
Now, you told me that your father, when you lived in your own hometown, would go to synagogue every day.
Yes.
Did he maintain a sense of observance in this ghetto?
Yes.
How was he able to do that?
Well, I know he had with him the talis and the twilim, and they did the best they can.
So there was a group of men that would get together?
Yes.
And besides the food that you brought with you from your home, were you given any other rations at all?
Only water.
So what you brought with you had to last you the whole time?
Well, most people had enough food to get around. Because when you are told to go, the first thing you do, you pack food.
How would you describe the sanitary conditions?
Sanitary conditions were bad. There were no toilets. They set up some temporary toilets where people would go. Or in the area where we were, we would put up a separation with a blanket. People would have a pot to make in, and then we would take it someplace to empty it.
Now, in this lumber yard of a ghetto, how many people would you say were congregated there?
There was about, I would say, 4,000 or 5,000 people.
So besides people from your hometown, where else would they have
From
come
the surrounding towns.
When did things come to a head when you were told that you were going to be resettled? It was 2 weeks into your stay there?
2 weeks.
Tell me about that time.
Well, we were told that we have to get ready to move out from the lumber yard, and we were taken to we were marched again like sheep, like cattle, to the railway station, where railway boxcars were ready, waiting for us, and still guarded by the Hungarians. And I remember a good number of my family were in the same boxcar as we were, my grandmother from my father's side, and uncles and aunts and cousins. And once they herded us into a cattle car, about 80 people in each car. Now, there was no toilet facilities. A blanket would be put in the corner. Somebody would go into behind the curtain. And after a day, it really started to be smelly. Now, at certain places, the train would stop. We would get water. And again, we still had some of the food that we carried with us. And there was straw on the floor of the train. And we were packed like herrings, and we really didn't know where we are going.
Were there windows?
There were little little windows, maybe 6 by 6 inch windows. And after about a day's ride, we could see mountains. So we knew that we are going north, because we could see it was late. It was May, but there was snow on top of the mountain. So we would know that we are going to the Carpathian Mountains. And once we got to the Hungarian-Czechoslovakian border, the Hungarian police has disappeared. And then from that point on, the Germans took over. So it was a total of 3 days' ride. So we must have left on the 22nd of May, 1944. And we arrived to Auschwitz on the 25th.
Now, during that whole train ride, you had been told initially that you were being resettled in a work camp.
Yes.
Was the belief still during that train ride that that's where you were going?
Well, we were hoping that would be the case, and nobody thought of anything worse.
Was there conversations in the...
Oh, there were always conversations, what tomorrow will bring.
So the day that you arrived, your final destination...
Well, when we arrived to Auschwitz, they opened the doors, and it was a sort of relief that the doors are open. We can get out of that car.
It was the first time the doors had opened since you had entered?
That was the first time it was opened where we can get out. It was opened previously when they gave us water or emptied the sewage.
What time of day was it?
I think we arrived around in the morning part of the day, about 10, 11 o'clock in the morning.
And what was the first thing that you saw?
Well, we got off the train, we lined up, and immediately the line marched toward a table where some Germans were sitting, and that was the selection, the people who were selecting who's going to go which direction.
Now, were you staying with your family at this time?
I was still with my family together, and so when we got to the selection, they were pointing, we were 4 children, we were sent one direction, my parents would be going the other direction.
How old would your parents have been?
My mother was 47, and my father was 50.
Now, did they say anything to you before you were sent to either direction?
No, no, because we had no idea that this is the last time we're going to see each other.
Before you got out the train, were there any words that were exchanged?
Not that I can remember. Probably there was, but I don't remember it.
So you and your brothers and sister went to one side?
Well, I remember being with my two brothers, but almost from the start, my sister would be sent on the side where women were, and I haven't seen her again until after the war.
Did the children, your brothers and your sister, did you exchange any words before being separated?
Well, we didn't exchange any words with my sister because, as I said, she went in a different direction, and we were three brothers together. And there is one thing. There's one thing that so I'm a little bit bugged now. When we got off the train, my mother was wearing a red scarf, very bright red scarf, which she received in a package from America. And so as she was marching away, I was watching her red scarf and getting smaller and smaller and smaller, but I could watch her as far as my eyes could see till there was no more. So this is the last time I have seen her.
So what happened to you next?
After we were taken after this, we were taken to a large holding area where we were told to take all the clothing, all our belongings, and throw it up in a big pile. The only thing we were allowed to keep is our shoes. So we took, I remember having a suit which my mother bought as a second-hand suit, and she had it remodeled for me. And that was the best suit I ever had. So I took it off and threw it up on a pile. And everything that we owned. So my brother happened to have a family picture, which he hid in his shoes.
Miklos or Erna?
Miklos. And so Well, eventually he lost that picture somewhere. And then we received the striped suits, to the concentration camp suit and a cap. We were taken to the barracks, and we were introduced to live in a barrack where there were 3 levels of bedding, about 20, 30 people on each level.
Were you given a number at this point?
Well, at this point, not yet. At this point, I was still together with both of my brothers. And we would be woken up 6 o'clock in the morning. We had about 5 minutes to get ready and out. Outside, we would be lined up 4 deep, and the German officer would come and count how many people are there. And we would get some rations, some stale bread and some soup or something that looked like coffee made from barley. And we would be lined up standing outside from 6 o'clock in the morning until 10 o'clock in the morning. And we were freezing. It was, in the morning it was very cold. Once we passed 10 o'clock, then started to get warm and eventually very hot. And we were still standing there. So in the morning we would be very cold. In the daytime we would be very hot. And that went on for the next, I believe, 10 days.
When did you realize where you were? Were you told you are at this particular camp?
Well, immediately when we saw the barbed wire fences, and we marched through a gate which says Arbeitsmacht-frei. Right away we knew that we are in a prison, and there were other prisoners who were there before us.
Did you come into contact with the older prisoners?
Yes. Yeah, we saw them. We came into contact, and we have noticed people would go over to the garbage dump or garbage box and took out whatever they can find to eat. And I made a remark to my brother that if I will ever have to do this, then I will kill myself first.
Did you have any conversations with the prior prisoners, inmates?
Yes. There were prisoners there who were in Auschwitz 2 or 3 years by that time.
And how did they treat you as a newcomer?
Well, we really didn't have any friction with them at this level. Now, after about 10 days, we were again told that we are marching on to another camp. So we were marched to a camp called Birkenau, which is about 3 kilometers away.
So you were in Auschwitz and you went to Birkenau?
Yes. In Birkenau, again, we had the same type of accommodation as in Auschwitz. And we woke up every morning to a horrible smell. And we didn't know what it was. But of course, later in life, we learned that we were smelling the people being burned.
Did you know there was a crematorium?
No, we didn't. We didn't. And one day in Birkenau, again, we were lined up into 4 deep, and we were going to get tattooed. And one German came along and counted so many people, and he cut the line. And it so happened my older brother was in a line about 3 rows in front of us. And they cut the line in between us. And that was the last time I ever have seen him.
So you were close to Nikos, and Erno was separated from you.
Yes. I thought this will happen. Then we went to line up for getting tattooed.
And it says A9528. So because your brother was in line with you, his number must be very close
Well,
to that.
he's next to me. He was first. So there's one number difference between him and me.
27?
Yes. So once we were tattooed, the next, I think in the same day, we were loaded on trucks, and we were taken out from Birkenau. And I remember going through one big city. It wasn't too far away, maybe 3 or 4 hours truck transportation. And we went through the city of Katowice. From there, we kept on going till we got to a concentration camp called Königshütte. Actually, it was in Königshütte, but the name of the camp was Eintrachthütte. And so this is where we stayed in barracks, and the barracks were here different already, where one person slept to one bed, and three levels, like a bunk bed.
At any point were you asked if you had a profession or you were trained in any kind of
No one.
work?
No, they gave us work, whatever they wanted us to work.
And at Auschwitz and Birkenau, had you worked?
No, there was no work there. In Eintrachthütte, I was selected to go with people to dig ditches. They were laying down some kind of pipe, water or gas pipe or something. And my brother was sent to a factory where they made heavy weapons. And so our life was there for the next 6 months, from middle of June until December, so about 7 months.
Is there any day that sticks out in your mind as the most salient day that you spent there?
Well, definitely there is. There was a group, a small group in the camp, which they tried to escape. They dug a tunnel. I believe it was about eight people. And they have escaped. However, there was one of the people, one of us, there was an informer. Group of 8 people have escaped. However, there was one informer whose name was Roth, and he told the Germans about the escape, and as a result, they were cut within a short time.
Did they escape at nighttime?
I don't know when they have escaped, but they went through a tunnel, and they did escape. And when they were cut, one day, the camp had two, that was in July 1944. The camp had two work shifts. One shift would go out 6 o'clock in the morning and come back 6 o'clock in the evening. And simultaneously, the other group was coming in and for the evening. This particular day, we were, our group, we were on a daytime shift. We came in 6 o'clock in the evening, and the outgoing shift was lined up in the camp, and they didn't go out, and we didn't know why. At this time, it is different. We came in, but they didn't go out. They had the entire camp lined up in four lines to make a full circle, and they brought in, and we saw a hanging post with a noose and a table underneath. And they brought out two people from the escaped group. One of them was the camp's barber, and I knew him personally.
What was his name?
I don't remember his name. And they stood them up on the table, and this German soldier or officer, who originates from Hungary, he could speak both German and Hungarian. And he stands up on a chair and made a speech. He says, you see these two dogs? They tried to escape. If any one of you will try the same, you get the same treatment. And they tied put the noose around their necks, and they ordered two young fellows about my age, says, come and pull the table out from underneath them. They came, they pulled the table out. And they were hanging, and you could see they were urinating. You can see it dripping down. And but the last words that one of them said, that is, it says, I can thank these two to Roth.
So he knew who had informed on
Yeah.
him.
And to go a little bit ahead of my time, at the end of the concentration camp period, the inmates have got even with Roth. They killed him. And closely related to this subject, about a week later, there was a very peculiar incident. I didn't feel well, and my brother suggested to me, he said, maybe I don't go to work and go under the bed and go to sleep. And I followed his advice, and everybody lined up. They went out to work, and I went to sleep under the bed. Now, I was at this time just over 16, about 16 and a half years old. So as I fell asleep, and I hear somebody yelling. It says, Tibor Schwartz, 9528, and heard this repeatedly. Now, at first I thought I'm dreaming, but then then they came closer, and I could actually hear them calling my name and my number. So I figured the best thing I can do is go out and face whatever there is to be faced. As I step out from the barracks, I see again one of these hanging posts up with a noose coming down, and quickly goes through my mind that, well, this must be for me. So this German SS and the capo, his name was Capo Martin. He says, come with us. So I go with them. They take me back to the workplace. They said, okay, go to work. I figured I got off very easy. So about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, this was sometimes in the mid part of the morning, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, just come with us. They took me down to the air raid shelter. The German took my head in between his legs, and Capo Martin took a piece of wood like a 2x4, and he was hitting my behind like you wouldn't believe it. And eventually I was urinating and making into my pants from pain, and probably the smell was so bad they let me go. And my behind was totally black and blue. So that evening, when we went into back to the camp, my brother was surprised that I'm marching in with the rest of the group. So he asked me what happened, and so I figured that if I tell him what happened, he'll blame himself. So nothing happened. They took me out. They told me to go do work, and I went to work, and nothing happened. And I couldn't sit down for the next 3 days, any place. I had such a pain. So after my pain was gone, and he believed that nothing happened, I told him what has happened. And that evening, again, they brought in 2 people from the escaped group, and they hung them again, just the same way as the first group.
Do you remember how these people looked? Had they been beat up at all, or?
They didn't seem to be beaten up. However, we have no way of knowing it, really.
Was it the similar kind of speech that you had heard the first time?
Yes. Yeah, just about the same. And at Eintrachthütte, the time kept on going on. I did my work as digging ditches, and whether you were young 16-year-old or 30 or 40 years old, it didn't make any difference. You had to do your quota of digging ditches. They measured out the space that you have to do on that day.
Were there only Hungarians at this camp, or other nationalities?
No, there were Hungarians, Polish, and others. Also, there were Gypsies and some Germans.
Were you able to converse with a common language?
Well, German was we started to learn some German. And now, even though we were all prisoners in the same camp, the Germans had the first hierarchy. The Gypsies were next, and the Jews were on the bottom. Now, we had 2 couples. Actually, we had more than 2 couples. We had about 5 couples in the camp, but the 2 that I could remember most would be one Capo Martin. He was a savage. And the other one was Capo Napoleon. And this Capo Napoleon, when he started to beat up somebody, he didn't know where the end is. He was merciless.
Napoleon was Jewish?
Jewish. And there were some other couples who weren't that bad, who weren't that bad. They were not all savages, but those who were savages, they were the worst you could imagine.
Now, would these be public displays or just indiscriminate?
It was public displays. Well, it was indiscriminate, but it was also public displays, both. Another thing I could remember from Eintracht, my brother once got a job as a after-work job to go to the local post office. Now, the camp had a post office where Germans or gypsies were allowed to get parcels. And they would mainly get food parcels. And they took him to open up parcels to make it ready for the examiner who's going to see if there's no weapons or something in the parcel. And then he had to repack the parcels. And one day he came back from his work and brought me a pocket full of cookie crumbs. And those crumbs tasted like the best meal I have ever had. Then later on, in the fall, they transferred me from the digging ditches to the factory where my brother worked, where they made heavy weapons. And I worked there until December.
What kind of work did you do there?
I was working on a machine that was shaving off metal. I don't know what is the name of that machine. It was part for the big guns.
How would you describe the mortality rate there? Because it was a work camp, it wasn't specifically a death camp.
Well, actually, strangely enough, from the time we got there in June till December, I haven't known even one dead other than the ones who were murdered by hanging. Nobody died there.
So punishment was beating?
Well, punishment was beating, but nobody was killed for the sake of killing.
Was it electrified barbed wire?
There were 2 lines of barbed wire. The inside was electrified and the outside was not electrified. Now, if somebody was, there were 2 ways of punishment, those who got punishments. One was they would put him for the endless days in between the 2 barbed wires. And he would stay there. But the worst punishment was they had a cubicle built from cement. This cubicle was about 5 feet high, about 5 feet wide and long. They had about a few inches of water on the floor. They would put somebody in there, and usually for as much as 24 hours or 48 hours, and he would stand in the water. Now, it was already late fall, and you couldn't sit down into the water because the water was cold. You couldn't stand up because the ceiling wasn't high enough for you to stand up. So you had to stand in the water for many hours, as much as sometimes 48 hours. And that was, to me, the worst punishment in that camp.
Did you ever have to go through that?
No.
Did you know anyone who did?
I did. I knew a number of people who had to do it. And so that was, from there we, in December 1944, the war started to come closer. And we have seen from the distance the big guns firing. We saw the lights. Then orders came that we are to be evacuated from there. And again, we boarded cattle cars, as many as they could push into one. And we went for about a day or day and a half ride to Mauthausen.
What did you see when you got there?
Well, we knew that we are going to another camp. In Mauthausen, we marched in from the railway to the camp on foot. As soon as we have arrived, we were lined up so many to a row, and the capos in Mauthausen has yelled out. Well, first they knew already who were the capos in the other camp, and they yelled out the names of the capos from the camp where we came from. And I remember this Capo Martin and Capo Napoleon. They were very eager to report themselves. They figured that a good job is awaiting them. And when they identified themselves, the capos of Mauthausen, they started to beat them savagely. See, they didn't want any competition. And they have practically beaten them to death. Now, the next thing they have ordered us to go into a shower, or we would take a shower, and it was very cold. It was January, and we had the shower in cold water. We put our thin pants on, a thin jacket, shoes, no socks, and we would have to walk from there to the barracks where we were staying. And it's approximately 1 kilometer walking. It was extremely cold. The barracks were once again 3 levels, about 30 people to each level, and by this time we were all like animals. You know, there was no nice guy things there. I remember that I fell off. I was on the top bunk, and I turned and I fell off. And some people were sitting below me, and they were drinking some hot water or tea or something. And I fell on top of them. And instead of comforting me, they were starting to beat me. So that was the first day. At night, I got up. I had to go to the washroom, and I noticed in the washroom that something is covered with a burlap, with a frozen burlap. When I pulled it off to see what is, I was curious what is underneath it. So I have seen the Capo Napoleon frozen and totally black and blue. The whole person was black and blue. And so he's got what was coming to him.
So he was dead?
He was dead. And I understood that the other capos were also dead.
How did you feel about that, because they had mistreated you?
Well, it was a pleasant thought that it was coming to him. They caught up with him. In Mauthausen, a lot of the guards and capos, they were homosexuals. And they were always looking for young people to find and have fun with. Luckily, neither my brother or I was one of them. And so in Mauthausen, we spent the days without doing anything. We had like a prison yard. We would go out and walk around. And I remember especially one night we heard machine gun fire for a long, long time. And we huddled together. We didn't know what is happening. Next day in the morning, we went out for a walk, and there was a basement, like a semi-basement under one of the buildings. And we have seen piles of bloody people dead. And we never found out why they killed them or what they did or what happened. But seeing in Mauthausen, seeing dead people was, we were getting used to it. Then we were very hungry. And in Mauthausen, I started to do what I said when I saw it the first time, to take food out of the garbage. So what that tells you that people can be reduced to the levels of worse than animals. If we want to save our lives, we'll do anything. We dug up old bones from the ground, and we put it over a fire and burned it so you could chew on it. We don't know what kind of bones they were. Never found out. Then spring started to arrive. It was already, we came up to April 1945. And people that we knew came into Mauthausen, a new group. And I met some people from my hometown. So one of them gave me a tube of toothpaste. You know, normally people would brush their teeth with toothpaste, but I licked them like candy. I licked some, then I gave it to my brother. He licked some, they gave it back to me. This is the funny part. Then they brought in horse meat from a dead horse, and we ate them like the best meal ever.
Where were they coming from?
Well, they were, this group was with a working group. They didn't come from a concentration camp, but they were with a working group. And they brought them into, I don't know where they came from, but they brought them to Mauthausen and joined the rest of, Mauthausen was a very large camp. Could have been as many as 100,000 people there. And
so they brought toothpaste and
horse meat. In Mauthausen, we didn't have toilets as such for the masses. So they dug ditches, they put a plank of wood over it, and people would, if people have to go, they would go sit down on the plank and over the hole, and you have to be careful not to fall over. Then in April, the leaves started to come out. There were some trees in the camp, and the leaves started to come out on the trees. And we picked the leaves just as they came out. We ate them, and we would eat anything that was edible.
Were you still getting rations at the time?
We were getting rations. We were getting bread, totally green, one piece of bread a day, some beet soup, water with cooked in beets, and well, we just survived, just barely survived what they gave us. And if I may go backtrack a little bit, some people asked me if I ever smoked, and I said I never took up smoking. And I give them 3 reasons why not. The first reason was that my father was a very heavy smoker, and he would make his own tobacco, make his own cigarettes, and when he finished a cigarette, he wouldn't throw away the butts, but he would put it up on top of a cabinet and smoke it later if he didn't have any tobacco. So one day I took one of his cigarette butts from the top of the cabinet and I lighted it up. I must have been about 10 years old. My mother caught me and she took a big wooden spoon and she hit it out. He hit my hand so the cigarette fell down. The second was, well, as I mentioned, that my father was a very heavy smoker, and on the Shabbat he didn't smoke. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon he was pacing up and down in the house to wait when the first star will be up so he can smoke. But the worst of the three was we received 3 cigarettes in Eintracht-Hütte. We received 3 cigarettes a month, everybody. And I would take my cigarette and sell it for bread. Now, under the normal circumstances, people would say, well, I don't smoke, I give it to him. But here it was the matter of life and death. If I can get his bread, I'm going to get it for cigarettes. And a man gave away he gave away his bread ration to get a cigarette for it. So that is so much for smoking.
So in your mind, you always associate it with that. How long did you stay at Mauthausen?
In Mauthausen, we were there till approximately middle of April, 1945.
At any point, were you separated from your brother at Mauthausen?
Yes. At one point, which was approximately February, late February 1945, my brother was taken away to a work camp. At this point, I thought that I will never see him again.
Did you have words between yourselves? Before?
Well, he was ordered to go, and as I said before, we were just about inhuman. You know, like a brother didn't really grieve over a brother because we just didn't have the... He didn't have the feeling. So while he was away, a group of Germans came into the camp, and they were sorting out people who were very skinny, and I was very skinny. And they wrote my number down, those who they sorted out, selected out for being very skinny or sick-looking, and I was one of them. They have written down my number. And the next day, my brother came back to Mauthausen, and we joined up again. And one day, a big truck pulls up front of the barrack, and this same German was calling out the numbers. And my brother, somehow he knew what is going to happen if they take me away. And he was much better off physically than I was. He had some meat on him. And when they called my number, he stood in. Number, and my brother stood in, and this German saw him, and he was in relatively good meat, and he threw him out from the line. He says, "What are you doing here? Get out of here." And that saved my life. So this was approximately sometimes in March 1945. In about middle of April 45, the war started to come closer to Mauthausen. Again, we could see already the flashing lights with the sound of guns firing off. And they ordered us to march out of the camp. Now we had nothing, no food, just the clothes on our backs. And we kept marching, and some people, approximately 25,000 people. Some people got tired, they sat down at the end of the line, and the Germans would come and kill them. They shot them. We could hear almost every few minutes guns firing. Some people were very hungry. They would run into the farmer's field and dig up with their hands potatoes that was just planted, and the Germans would shoot into the field and kill them right there. At night, we stopped in the forest to bed down. We did have one blanket each, and there was no food, no ration. We walked around in the forest and we saw these escargots climbing on the trees. We would catch them and suck the meat out of them. So that was our meal. And we spent 2 nights similarly in the forest, like after the first day and after the second day. And constantly we heard from the rear guns firing off. And whoever couldn't walk, they were finished. On the third day in the morning, we started to walk, and my brother says, "No, I'm very tired, I can't make it. I can't keep up." But somehow, although I was very skinny, I had strength. And I said, "Look, only a few more kilometers." I said, and I was I was practically carrying him. So, no, I can't make it. Well, we only have a short time to go, only short time. So I kept on telling him that keep it up. So finally we arrived where we were going, about approximately 25,000 people.
And where was that?
That was in a place called Gunskirchen. Gunskirchen is a town near Wels in Austria, within 5 or 10 kilometers away. Now, Gunskirchen was located in a forest, trees all over the place. A lot of people were very sick. They had either typhus from lice, or they had diarrhea. And the sanitary system was, there was the same like in Mauthausen, a ditch was dug and a plank over it, and that was the toilet.
How many toilets were there?
There was one long, maybe 20, 30 people could go at the same time.
For how many people were in the camp?
25,000. And there was a lineup for people having to go. Once one special thing sticks out in my memory. This man was standing in a line to go to the toilet, and he couldn't hold out. He had diarrhea, and he went next to a tree. As he took his pants off, he sat down. This German guard came over to him and pointed his rifle at him and killed him dead on. He fell into his own excrement. And people started to die by the hundreds.
What did they do with the corpses?
Well, the corpses, they made a pile of corpses. They tried to catch me many times to carry the dead, but somehow I always managed to escape and not to do the job. And by the end of 3 weeks, there were corpses maybe as high as a 3-story building. And some people didn't have shoes, so if somebody died, they would take his shoes off, or take his pants off, take his jacket off. And we were full of lice. Now, the lice already, we brought it with us from Mauthausen. And it was a sunny day. We would sit outside, take our jackets off, and kill lice. And as fast as we could kill them, they would come back. And so that was our pastime, killing lice out of our clothing.
What were your living conditions like? Were there barracks?
We were in the barracks. We slept on the floor. We had one blanket each. And of course,
wooden barracks?
Wooden barracks. And there were no beds. We were sleeping on the floor and as tight together as possible. So the sanitary conditions were just non-existent.
Well, you said there were about 25,000
Well,
prisoners.
there was more than one barrack. There were many barracks.
How many people would be per barrack?
Maybe 500-600 people in one barrack. The food was, again, some beets cooked in water, stale bread, and even that not nearly enough for what you would have to eat. So by the end of the second week in Gunskirchen, rumors started to come in that we're going to be liberated very soon.
Did you take those rumors seriously?
Well, you know, when somebody is drowning, you hold on to a straw. So next day comes, again, rumors coming that we're going to be soon liberated. By the third day, as I said to my brother, I said, you know, I'm not going to believe a word of this until I see the first liberation army. So this went on for about 5, 6, or 7 days. And sure enough, on the morning of May 5th, 1945, we went outside the barracks and there were no guards. The guards were gone. So we knew that if the guards are gone, things must be near. And within hours, the American army we saw the first soldiers arriving in jeeps and trucks. And the American soldiers, they couldn't believe their eyes what they have seen there. And to backtrack a little bit, between the time the Germans were gone and the Americans have arrived, there was food in the food magazine, in the storage. And everybody was rushing to get to the food. I went there and two people lifted me up. I went through a small window, and I grabbed several loaves of bread that I came out with. And I carried the bread in my arm, just as a whole bunch of people jumped me, and they took away everything from me. So then I went back to the same window, and this time I took one bread. I took one bread, put it under my coat, and I got away with it. However, we were lucky. Those who could only find bread was very lucky. A friend of mine, who was my Hebrew teacher's son, same age as I was, he found canned meat. And he would open a can of meat, and he was hungry. He ate it all. And when you eat that kind of a food from a can, it's like eating poison. And within 2-3 days, he was gone. He died.
Did this happen to a lot of people?
A lot of people who started to eat meat and heavy food, they died from the system couldn't carry it. And those who were lucky didn't find any meat. Now, when the Americans came in, they brought in machinery, sanitary machineries. The first thing they did, they sprayed us with DDT powder from head to toe, and the lice were gone almost immediately. Then they said, don't eat anything other than what we what we are going to to give you. They gave they gave us for several weeks rice boiled in water.
Now, did you remain in Gunskirchen?
Well, they transported out soon after to Wels, and we occupied a military building. It used to be German military building.
Before you left, did you take note of their reaction? You said there were like 3-story high corpses.
Yes.
What happened to those?
Well, we left, and the bodies were left there, and it was never seen it again. And I believe that they brought in German prisoners to dispose of them. In Wels, where we were taken by truck, only a short distance away, we were put up in a building which was previously a military building. And there were all kinds of rifles and guns in the hallways, full. And all the German weapons were in the hallways and wherever they could be left. By this time, I was getting weaker and weaker, skinnier and skinnier. Now, at age 16, I weighed about 60 pounds, or less than 30 kilos. I was nothing but skin and bone. So the doctor came to the building where we stayed, and he told my brother to bring me into the hospital because I need immediate hospital care. And in my mind, I was still dealing with the Germans. So I hid myself, and I didn't want to go to the hospital. And a few days later, I was deteriorating very badly. So my brother took me and delivered me to the hospital. And when the same doctor saw me, he actually gave me a big slap in the face. He said, "I told you to come in. Why you didn't come in? You're almost finished. You're almost dead." So they put me into the hospital. The first thing they did, they injected into me two big bottles of plasma. And my chest swelled to 3 times what it was before. It was tremendously painful. And I was in this hospital for 6 weeks. But once I got out of the critical condition, I started to get my life back. And food at this point was still not plentiful. They let me go out for a walk from the hospital, and I could walk like a 100-year-old man would walk, inches at a time. And somebody threw out a bread from the window, from the upper window. And I must have been a distance maybe like 50 feet away. There was another man who saw the same bread, and he was maybe 10 times the distance from the bread than I was, and he got there first. After 6 weeks, we went into a displaced persons camp, and I felt better, and I could move around, and I was cheerful. One day, some of the boys that I knew came into the camp and said, "You know that there's a military camp not far away, an American military camp, and they have a big warehouse full of food, and some people who were there who brought back some food from there." So of course they had to steal the food. They didn't get it. So I said to my brother, I says, "Well, why don't we go there too and see what we can do?" So my brother says, "No, I don't want to go. I don't feel like going. I'm afraid." I said, "Okay, I'm going without you." So I took the train to go there, about a half-hour train ride, and I found this large food warehouse with many trucks inside loaded with boxes. I remember I crawled through a window again, and I got to one of these trucks, and there was a balcony up on top, and all of a sudden I see an American soldier marching up and down, and I hid myself behind the truck. So either he didn't see me or he didn't want to see me. I never figured it out. So I took the first carton off a truck, whatever I could find, and I couldn't read what it says on it. I didn't speak English. And I carried the box out. So when I got back to the railway station, I opened up the box and I see a can with a big tomato on it. So it was a box of tomato juice. So we boarded the train, and there were a number of others who did exactly what I did. They went to steal food. And so they asked me, "What do you have?" I said, "I have tomato juice." I said, "What do you have?" "I have ham." And the other had beans, whatever. So I said, "Would you give me some tomato juice for ham?" So we kept on exchanging. So by the time I get back to my camp, I got off the train, I had tomato juice and I had ham and beans and about 10 different items. Just as we get off the train, a military policeman, an American, says, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going back to," gave him the name of my camp where we stayed. He says, "Do you have any permit to leave the camp?" I said, "No." "Come with me." So they took me with his jeep, and they put us into a holding area with barbed wire. Now when they turned their backs, I got out of there and I started to go toward the camp. Within a few minutes, the same military policeman with the same jeep comes and says, "Hey, where are you going?" I said, "I'm going back to the camp." "No, come back." So he puts me back into the barbed wire holding area. And then they brought a big truck, and they took us back to the camp with our boxes and food and everything. So my brother was very happy that I brought back lots of all kinds of food. And so that was the end of that episode.
Now, when did you go back to Romania, and how?
Approximately in mid-July, we decided that we are strong enough to start moving on. And we started to walk to the nearest railway station. And trains were not going in those days. Only occasionally a train would pass by. And we slept out on the field under straw. And one night, on our way to get to the railway, where we could catch a railway car, there was a big rain, and we were under the straw, and we were soaking wet. And next day we started out, we went, we were hungry. We went across to the Russian side of the occupation forces. And I couldn't speak Russian, but I could show with my hand that we are hungry. So let's come on in.
Had you received any identification papers from the hospital or the American Army?
No, we had nothing. We had nothing. The Russians said, come on in. They sit us to a table, and they gave us a big bowl of cabbage soup, bread, and they were nice to us. We left. Finally, we get to the railway where we could catch a car to Vienna. And so the attendant at the railway station said that there's no train going through, but a locomotive will come through any minute, and if we want to go on top of the locomotive, we can go.
On top of it?
On top of it. You know, in those days, the locomotives went with coal. They fired with coal, and we would be sitting in the coal carrier. So we went from outside Linz to Vienna on the top of a locomotive. By the time we got there, we were all black, totally black. So we didn't know where we're going to go from here on, but somebody mentioned there's a hospital in there's a Jewish hospital called the Rothschild Hospital. So we got in there, and they washed us, they clothed us, they gave us food, and we stayed there for about a week.
Was this a hospital that was run by the Joint, or?
It was run by a Jewish organization. It was immediately after the war. Now, after a few days staying there, somebody said that there's a truck going to Budapest, and if we want to go with them, we can go. So we agreed to go, and it took us about 6 or 8 hours to get to Budapest. And when we got to Budapest, this is the first time I have seen a newspaper in a long time, and the headline in the paper was that the atom bomb was dropped on Hiroshima.
Did you
in
know
Japan.
what an atom bomb was?
Well, we knew what a bomb was, and it was talking about huge destruction. It was August 6th. We were in Budapest for about 1 day. Then by train, we got a train which took us to Debrecen, which is the nearest large city to Érmihajfalva. And from there, somebody took us by horse and carriage back to our house.
So it was still part of Hungary at this time?
No, by this time it was Romania. Immediately after the war, the Hungarians had to give it back to the Romanians. And when we got there, only then we learned that our sister was at home.
So she was already there when you got
Yeah.
there. Tell me about the reunion.
Well, we didn't know nothing about her, and she didn't know nothing about us. She lived with my uncle next door.
Now, were you allowed to go back to the house where you had grown up?
Yes, the house was there, and she lived with our uncle next door. And as soon as we came home, we found grass in our yard about 4 feet tall, and the house was in a shambles, dirty, and we started to clean it up right away. And within days, we all moved in.
There was that closet in the wall that your father had
Yeah,
built.
that closet was still there, but empty. And as soon as we moved back, the first day, my sister wanted to cook something, but she had nothing to cook. And I went outside the door, and what do you think I see? I see a chicken walking. And I started to run after the chicken as fast as I could, and I have outrun the chicken. I caught him. I killed the chicken. I said, "Here, we have what to eat." And but slowly, we tried to get our lives back to a livable condition. And within well, the next thing, as I mentioned that we were in Austria, we slept under the straw. It was raining, and by the time I got back home, I got sick. I had a lung infection, and I was on the doctor's care for the next 6 months. But again, I survived and got back to good health. And again, stepping back into the past for a few months, when the Americans sprayed us with the DDT powder, they also cut our hair off completely. And my hair, when I went into the hospital in Wales, I had fleck typhus from the lice. And my hair didn't start growing for the next 6 months at all. Like, I figured that from here on I will be bald. But 6 months later, my hair started to grow back. And once I got back to good health, there was a acquaintance who were a dental technician.